All right, welcome back to episode 5 of Reider's Block, hosted by yours truly, Journal staff writer Sean Reider. It's May. Spring ball everywhere is pretty much done. I don't even think pretty much done. I think it's all over at every single school, including UNM. They wrapped up last week, or at least last week at the time of recording right now. And I just want to go over a couple final takeaways from spring practice and what we kind of saw and what we kind of learned towards the end of spring practice that we haven't recapped on the podcast. Namely, everybody has been talking about it. I know it is formally closed for basketball and football at this point, but the transfer portal, Bronco Mendenhall, the head coach for New Mexico football, he did say at the end of spring practice on the very final day, that the roster is going to continue to change. And that's not wholly surprising at this point. He did not give a specific number on how many scholarships they have open, but they do have a good amount of scholarships open. I'm going to say in the window of, I think 16 to 20. That's kind of what I have just off the top of my head right now. And I haven't been able to verify that number entirely, but I mean, they do have a lot of open spots to fill. The plan right now for them, they're going to try and fill them first through the transfer portal in terms of, maybe some P5 downs transfers, some G5 kind of lateral transfers, maybe some FCS guys and all that. And then they're going to be looking at, they're looking at a couple already, junior college players that have graduated and kind of taken care of that and can kind of finally move on after their 2-year stint. And then after that, high school prep recruits and the like. So if you haven't seen any portal news recently, it's not because it's not out there. It's just, there just hasn't been much of any. And normally you see a lot of spring practices towards the end for multiple programs. Off the top of my head, Colorado is one that's been getting a lot of attention, obviously, because of how they do things in particular. But they've had some, a good amount of kids transfer out at the end of spring ball. Michigan State. Program I'm well familiar with. They've also had a good amount of names leave the program as well. That hasn't really been the case with UNM, and that's partially from what I've kind of seen and what I think everybody else can kind of see. They've kind of done that already in terms of the 8-week conditioning period that they did after the semester began in January. And, throughout spring ball, you saw different names kind of disappear from the roster, and we would double check and find out that they had entered the transfer portal, or they would just announce a decision on their own. So I think you're not going to see a whole lot of people entering. Well, you're not going to at this point because the portal's closed. You didn't see a whole lot of people after spring ball and that 3-day window between when practice ended and when the transfer portal closed. You didn't see a whole lot of that because, plain and simple, most of the guys that were going to leave have already left at that point. I'm curious in terms of how many they're going to pull from the portal in terms of not even, P5 down transfers to G5 lateral transfers, just in general, how much they fill from that spot. I know they've been very busy, UNM has, in terms of putting out offers and recruiting, as you are wont to do and supposed to do. But they just haven't been able to, with the exception of Soljay Maeva-Peters, who was a former BYU quarterback and running back, and Tyreek Austin Cave, a former West Virginia Miami linebacker. And those guys weren't even, I think, landed really in the true kind of 15-day spring portal window. They just haven't, hit on a bunch of guys so far. So I'm curious to see how soon and how many commitments kind of come in for them through the transfer portal at this point. It's kind of clear that they are targeting more defensive transfers at this point in terms of defensive backs, defensive linemen, linebackers of different ilks that kind of either fit their system better or in certain spots, I'll go back to linebackers as well, that they just need kind of numbers in that room as a whole at this point to really feel good about the depth going into the season. So I'm very curious to see how this develops. It feels like we've done the spring portal window in their entirety, but it feels a little bit off because we were listening and checking in on spring practice that, throughout that entire period, essentially. One thing that I thought that stood out to me beyond the portal and beyond Bronco Mendenhall's comments on that is that he felt that the team got enough volume this spring. And his quote, not at the expense of the foundational elements that need to be built. I thought this was interesting. He felt that in his first year at Virginia, when he left BYU and came over to become the head coach of Virginia, that he felt that they didn't spend just nearly enough time on football. He felt that they spent, maybe if you can even spend that much time, you spent too much time on kind of resetting the culture. He felt that the culture he kind of walked into was not at all what he kind of felt they needed to be successful, and they adopted the earn not given mold that is kind of in effect here at UNM and all that. But they went 2-10 that first season at Virginia. I think the first game they got rocked by FCS Richmond, which was a really good FCS team that year. But still, you're a ACC program and all that's happening. He just kind of said he said at the end of UNM spring practice that he feels that right now he feels it's a more similar situation to year 2 at Virginia, when they kind of took a step back and said, hey, we need to be playing football as much as we possibly can within the constraints that we have. So I think that should be encouraging for fans. I think there is a feeling, at least from some fans I've talked to, that that there's a feeling that, hey, we know his track record and we know that things will likely turn at some point, given the fact that he's done it in different, at different schools and different positions and been a part of it, a turnaround at New Mexico in the first place. But that the first season might be rough sledding in some ways. I think just the fact that they've, that they're willing to come out and say that hey, we knew we needed to play as much football as we possibly could. That should be kind of encouraging to some fans. I think in terms of just driving the final product that you're going to be expecting to see this fall. One quote that also stood out to me in terms about playing as much football as they could. Bronco said, that's really helping us drive the personal choices we're going to make, but it's not polished, it's not finished, it's not consistent. I use that word, consistent, after our spring scrimmage, and that really is trying to match the abilities of the schemes with the right chemistry and the right collection of players at any one time. I've spent a lot of the spring, in particular, trying to get a good beat on what they want to do offensively and defensively scheme-wise. Try to explain that the best I can in podcasts and articles as well. So I think it's a little bit interesting that even with the time that they have, that some things might not be totally settled. I think they're pretty settled in terms of what they want to do defensively. Offensively, it seems like they could flip more based on the personnel that they have, and that could be something through the portal. And in terms of turning, on that note, in terms of turning the page to fall camp, it is kind of a futile exercise because there's going to be some degree of roster turnover. It could be a little bit of roster turnover. It could be a lot. My estimation, I don't think that some of the key pieces that are already with UNM on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball, I don't think there's anybody that's looking to really move on at this point. There's not going to be any surprise departures, and even though the portal's already closed, I think that's been kind of already ruled out at this point. But with the roster continuing to change, a couple of the things I'm curious about and looking forward to seeing during fall camp and heading into the season. I mentioned him earlier. J. Maeva Peters. He should be familiar to some New Mexico football fans in general. At the 2022 New Mexico Bowl, he was BYU's starting quarterback. He led the Cougars to a 24-23 win over SMU. Very good New Mexico Bowl. I remember watching that actually before I moved out here. I'm curious to see. I'm assuming he is going to be used as a quarterback, if only for the fact that they kind of have a fourth quarterback spot open right now in that room. And the fact that, I asked Bronco Mendenhall about this at the end of spring ball as well. Ryan Cook, who's a La Cueva product and a transfer in from South Dakota School of Mines, he is in the quarterback room right now, Bronco said, but the exact phrase he used is that doesn't mean he's a quarterback. So they haven't really found a role for him. So with that in mind, Maeva Peters to me is pretty intriguing. I'm curious to see how it's kind of talked about in the fall in terms of, because he's here at the moment, that we're going to reopen the competition for the quarterback room, or if they're going to treat it where it's still Devin's job, and Maeva Peters really has to come from behind to beat him out. But I'm just curious to see what he brings. It's a similar mold as Devin, clearly a dual threat guy. He won the New Mexico Bowl offensive MVP honors, really just on the strength of his rushing abilities. I think he rushed for 96 total yards. He was really hard to bring down that game. His first career start. And it was enough to get it done for BYU on that night. I mentioned in terms of, there probably won't be any dramatic or, incredible scheme changes on defense. But I am interested in seeing just more out of this finalized defense. I think The spring game was an interesting showcase in some ways. Really kind of a rough start, kind of erratic for them in terms of just giving up big plays and kind of missing on, trying to, some plays that shouldn't have been big plays, but just couldn't make that one tackle, couldn't get that one guy in there. I'm interested in just seeing more out of them and how that unit just comes together. I think it's no secret. Obviously, New Mexico was not great on defense last year. They were one of the worst teams in terms of stop rate. For the first half of the season, at the very least, they gave up big plays. They gave up more big plays in the passing game than really any other team in the country. I don't think that this coaching staff is kind of looking at last year and saying that, we really need to address all these issues. I think it's kind of a different approach. We need to install our scheme and then get our guys in, and then whatever issues are there, we'll address them in turn. But I just want to see more in terms of what the first team defense could look like in that line. I'm also curious as well, just see more from the offensive line. The kind of end of spring offensive line was Baraka Beckett, Mackenzie Agnello, Richard Pierce, Wallace Unamba, and Juwan Singletary at center. I did not list them from tackle to center to tackle, excuse me. But I'm just curious to see more out of them, how that group grows together. I talked to Juwan Singletary. He's a Grambling State transfer. Talked to him at the end of spring ball, and he said, there was kind of, not quite up and downs, but it took a little bit of time. We just all had to figure out the right way for us to communicate together. They feel that they figured that out this spring, and I'm curious to see how that translates into the fall in terms of camp, and then obviously August 24th when New Mexico kicks off against Montana State. That is at the time of recording 113 days until August 24th. Excuse me. That is, we're right now at the time of recording, we're 113 days until kickoff against Montana State. But with that, that's all I have for the moment. This might be one of the last weekly Riders Block episodes we do, just with the end of spring ball. But if you want to listen to old episodes of Riders Block, you can find them on the Albuquerque Journal Podcast Network, available on Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. You can also listen to old episodes of James Yotis, my colleague, his podcast Prep Central, and Jeff Grammer, Talking Grammar as well. And they're all available, super easy to find. Highly recommend you subscribe to the YouTube page as well. With that, thank you for listening.